Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, Your Excellency Ambassador Artu Spiru, let us continue with the second session of this day. I am honored to have the Honorable Minister Dan Tihan, Minister of Trade, Tourism and Investment, joining us live for the 2021 edition of the annual meeting of Romanian diplomacy. Dear Minister, thank you so much for attending this annual meeting. It is an event which is basically the highlight of the diplomatic year in Bucharest, gathering all our heads of missions worldwide. The Honorable Minister Tihan is an experienced politician and diplomat whose ample portfolio include trade, investment and tourism, key sectors for post-pandemic economic recovery. Our annual reunion represents for us a moment to reflect, to draw future objectives and set priorities, assess our achievements of the last year together with our most important partners. As the Indo-Pacific becomes one of the most prominent regions of economic growth, we need to develop synergies and to contribute together to the stability and security of the world. Australia is an active promoter of democratic values, of multilateralism, of rules-based international order. Member of the main multilateral security formats in the region and economic formats, Australia is also a key partner of the United States in the framework of free and open Indo-Pacific strategy. Our like-mindedness brings Romania and Australia together on most of the main topics of the current global agenda. We share a very compatible security posture as allies of the United States. We share similar concerns regarding the challenges posed by important international actors playing against the prevailing game with actions undermining the rules-based international order as well as eroding the economic and social fabric of democratic societies. The cooperation with Indo-Pacific and in the Indo-Pacific is one of the priorities for a stable, peaceful and prosperous world. So Romania is committed to step up its engagement in the region within the framework of the next EU strategy on the Indo-Pacific, but also on our own. Romania and Australia believe that international free trade and investment, along with resilient supply chains, are among the crucial factors for post-pandemic recovery. Despite the pandemic, we are demonstrating that hard work and determination are key ingredients to overcome the geographic distance and give a new momentum to our bilateral relations. And I would start by mentioning an example, the Macquarie Group becoming an important key player in the Romanian energy market. This significant deal, which is estimated to top 1 billion euros, is a good signal for foreign investors' choice for Romania. And it provides also a good ground for expanding our cooperation in the field of energy, especially renewables, as a common national priority. Another success story, which I just mentioned during our phone conversation, which we had just a couple of minutes ago, the icebreaker and oceanographic ship Nuina, built at the Daman shipyard in Galați. Hope that the entry into operation of this ship by the end of the year will also open the path towards more successful projects between our countries in engineering and research. I could give some other examples, for instance, the bilateral cooperation in the field of health services, which is something that we can develop further. We had a very good phone conversation and we tried to, pinpoint which are the main areas where we can work together in the near future. And I would like also to thank Australia for its support for Romania's accession to OECD. I will not conclude before saying that in Australia there is a very large Romanian community. It's the biggest community of Romanians from Asia and Oceania. Our fellow nationals are particularly well integrated into the Australian society and provide a valuable contribution for their community's development. And I hope that they will contribute at the further bridge connecting our two countries, our people, their talents, innovation and commitment. So I will have now the pleasure and honor to give the floor to the Minister of Commerce of Australia to share with us the Australian vision of what does resilience mean in times of pandemic. So Mr. Minister, you have the floor.
And can I say what a pleasure it is to join you this evening here in Australia. And can I also acknowledge our two ambassadors who are joining us as well, and thank them for the role they're playing in enhancing the relationship between Australia and Romania. Normally, when you start a speech, you're often advised that you need to have an icebreaker. And Minister, you've already mentioned our icebreaker, and I've got to say I was thrilled to be able to learn when I read my briefing of the Romanian ship, the icebreaker that's heading to Australia right now. And I think that bodes well for the future enhancement of our relationship, because as we discussed over the phone, there is a lot in common, although there is a great distance between our two nations. And I think it does point to a very bright and fruitful relationship which can continue to grow over time based on shared values and a belief in open markets, a belief in democracy. And these are all things that we need to continue to cherish. And I know from the Romanian point of view, where you've come from since 1989, as we've discussed, you understand very much the importance of these values and these principles, as we do. Right here in our region, in the Indo-Pacific, there has been a big change in the geostrategic climate, and that has presented serious challenges for Australia, but challenges which we're absolutely determined to meet. And there's really three clear approaches that we are following to deal with this, and I'll step through these three approaches and then more than happy to open up for questions. The first thing that we're doing is building our national resilience. We want to make sure that when it comes to our nation, that we can stand on our 2 feet and that we are in a position of strength to deal with the geostrategic climate that we are currently facing. So what does that mean? Like Romania, it's meant that we've wanted to ensure the security and the sovereignty of our nation. We've put forward legislation to make sure we've been able to do that, from areas such as dealing with 5G, for issues dealing with foreign interference, all serious legislative approaches that we've taken to make sure that we can deal with these issues. We've also made sure that we continue to diversify our trade. So we've had an approach which has been to ensure that where we can diversify as much of our trade as we possibly can. And this has been a deliberate policy approach that we've taken. And more recently, we were very pleased to be able to announce agreement in principle with the United Kingdom on a free trade agreement, which further diversified the access that we're able to get for our exporters across the globe. As a matter of fact, since our government has been in office since 2013, the amount of goods, services and investment covered by bilateral free trade agreements has moved from 23% to now over 75%. So we really, truly do believe in putting agreements in place that demonstrate that if you have order, that if you have rules in place, that's the best way that we can commercially deal with each other. And I know you've got the Indian Foreign Minister coming up as well. And one of the things Australia is very keen to do is to build our economic partnership even further with India. And that's something I'm exploring with the Indian Trade Minister at the moment. So building that national resilience has been incredibly important. The second thing that we have been doing is making sure that we are enhancing our alliances, enhancing the way we work with countries within our region and across the globe. So building partnerships, especially amongst like-minded countries who believe in the importance of that rules-based approach, and how that rules-based approach has helped the globe, especially since the Second World War. We want to make sure that we have an open strategic area here in the Indo-Pacific. We're one that's based on rules, and that's what we're working with other countries to do. One of the important initiatives that we've been a part of is the establishment of the Quad, this new grouping between India, Australia, the US and Japan, and what it has been able to do, for instance, with regards to providing vaccines into the Indo-Pacific through the commitments it's made, and also being able to distribute vaccines into our region is just one example of how the Quad has been able to help when it comes to the Indo-Pacific. We obviously are also working very closely with countries in the European Union as well to make sure, especially as Europe also looks to the Indo-Pacific, where the weight of the world is now placed, that we can work collaboratively with the European Union on this. And then the third area that we are looking at is that we are trying to do everything we can to ensure that the rules-based order continues. We've seen all countries globally since the Second World War benefit from the rules-based approach, and we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to ensure that we continue to have a rules-based approach, whether it be the trade, whether it be in the maritime area or any other area, because we see that is incredibly important. And so we're active participants, for instance, in the World Trade Organization. We're active participants when it comes to APEC. We're active participants when it comes to the OECD. We see this approach also as absolutely fundamental to how we want to see the globe continue to operate. One, that's one where it's free, where it's open, and where all of us can continue to prosper. So I'll leave it there. I will finish on one note though, and that is addressing the bilateral relationship between Australia and Romania. I think there is enormous potential for the relationship if we can conclude the Australia-EU Free Trade Agreement. I think further liberalisation between the EU and Australia will enable us to trade a lot more freely, to see much more investment coming from Australia to Romania, like we've seen with Macquarie. And I think if once we can get this agreement in place, we'll really see the economic and commercial relationship continue to be enhanced. And my hope is that we can have an agreement in place by the middle of next year. We'll have the 12th round of negotiations next month in October. We're getting near the end game, and we would really like to be able to draw the FTA to a conclusion by the middle of next year, because we think that that will further deepen and enhance the economic partnership between Australia and the EU and with Australia and Romania. So, Minister, I'll leave it there and happy to answer questions or take comments. Thank you very much, and can I just once again say what a pleasure it is to join you all this evening.
Well, thank you so much, Minister, for your insightful contribution to the works of our meeting. This ends the public part of this session. We will continue shortly with our debate. Um, it is a great pleasure to welcome you, Minister, to the annual reunion of the Romanian ambassadors of this year. It is for us a great pleasure and a great opportunity to exchange views with Your Excellency. You are the main speaker at this panel. I very much regret that despite our joint efforts, we could not meet in Slovenia last week when we attended the Bled Strategic Forum and the Gimnich meeting. But this is a very good opportunity today to benefit from your vision and views regarding this topic of our reunion, which is on the agenda of all main international organizations, which is building resilience in times of crisis, in the context of the pandemic, but not only. Indeed, in the last 1 year and a half, the pandemic has come to be a defining factor of international politics, and we have a lot of challenges before us, challenges that cannot be compared with the ones before the pandemic. But hard times are also a driver for change and for improvement, for building strength, for building resilience, for mobilizing all our resources, for giving the best of us as individuals, societies, and institutions. In that spirit, I think what is important is to see not only what we can do separately, individually, as nations or institutions, but what we can do together in order to cope with these challenges. And strengthening cooperation with such a like-minded partner as is India is for us a very important long-term objective for Romania. As we have noticed, the pandemic has produced impacts on various areas, social, economic, political. It accelerated or reinforced certain trends that already existed, such as digital transformation, and that's why we are now in this format. This is the second time we organize the annual reunion of our ambassadors in this virtual format. The reconfiguration of supply chains, or even the redefining what a workplace means. For many of these trends, the Indo-Pacific region has emerged as vitally important at world scale. At domestic level, but even more so in our respective regions, there is a clear need for a process of resilience building. And this means that we need to build our self-defense, not only in front of pandemics, but also in front of infodemics, cyber and hybrid attempts to undermine our security and stability. By developing our own resilience, we will be able to respond to the needs of our citizens, but also to be able to act swiftly to help others and reinforce what we call the rules-based international order and the multilateral system. And this is the way Romania has acted in early April, when we were among the first ones to join the European effort in sending medical support to save lives in India. And I'm very glad that this solidarity with Indian people reaffirmed Romania's commitment to deepen and expand the relationship with India in traditional areas, but also in emerging areas of interest for both our countries. Romania and India, acting as democracies in a challenging geopolitical landscape, can provide a valuable common input into the resilience of the rules-based international order. And in this respect, I have to underline the strong example India set during its tenure as the monthly rotational presidency of the Security Council by organizing sessions on maritime security, on peacekeeping missions, on counterterrorism, the last both meetings being chaired by you, Minister. The same month, under the prominent Indian authorship, the UN Security Council issued a resolution of Afghanistan, reflecting our common concern that the Afghan territory must not host threats to any country or shelter terrorists. And these are ways to make our contribution to make the world a better, a fairer, a safer place for next generations. This is also the way in which our partnership can forge new meanings for itself and open a new chapter for our bilateral relations, a moment very well represented symbolically by the Minister's interaction today with all our ambassadors. Minister Jaishankar, with you in office, I know we have a solid ground for our bilateral agenda, given the attention you are personally paying to the present-day menaces to the global order and international stability, from nuclear security to territorial and maritime disputes and to terrorist threats. On this note, I would like to invite Your Excellency, Minister Jaishankar, to take the floor.
Thank you, Excellency Foreign Minister Aurescu, colleagues in the Romanian Foreign Ministry and the Diplomatic Corps. It's a great pleasure to address this annual gathering of Romanian diplomacy. Foreign Minister, it's good to see you at Bled last week. We couldn't set aside time, but it was good of you to be there at the Foreign Ministers meeting, the Gimnik meeting. And you remember we had a good discussion there on Afghanistan and the Indo-Pacific, and I'm sure we will probably revisit some of those topics today. Before I proceed further, I want to really express my thanks for the gestures of solidarity and support that you gave us during the second wave of our COVID pandemic. Those are very, very tough times, and for us it was a source of great moral support to know that friends across the world stood by us. Now, the focus on resilience in times of pandemic is certainly a very appropriate theme for your deliberations, particularly if we treat resilience not just as a physical attribute, but actually as an approach to international relations. As the Indian Foreign Minister, my remarks naturally address how India is and will be relevant to your thinking at this time. Some of that arises directly from our cooperation with Romania, as also with the European Union, of which we are now part. Part of it may also stem from how you would evaluate the growing salience of India in world affairs as a whole. But not least, there is the impact that India has on major global issues of our times, matters that would obviously impinge on Romania's well-being as well. Taken together, I believe they make a strong case on why we need to pay more and continued attention to our relationship. So let's start with India-Romania ties. At the political level, Minister, I'm sure you would agree, they are excellent. They are very well serviced by a framework of agreements and mechanisms, which is very typical of such cases. We have seen high-level visits, such as those of our Vice President in 2018 and by your President a decade earlier. Your predecessor as Foreign Minister traveled to India in 2018, and our Minister of State was in Bucharest some years before that. The 18th meeting of our Joint Economic Commission met in 2017. So you can see that there's been regular contacts, but I'm sure we can do better. And certainly, Minister, I would welcome you in India, and I'll really see if, as the travel restrictions ease up, whether, there's an early opportunity for me to come as well. Now, where trade is concerned, we hit a high of US dollars 810 million turnover in 2017-18. We've come down a bit after that, but of course the last 2 years have been tough because of COVID. The trade basket is largely composed of machinery and equipment, chemicals, pharmaceuticals, metallurgy, medical equipment, and vehicles. Our companies have invested in each other's economy. And certainly from the Indian side, I can tell you that some of our big names in steel, in IT, in pharma, they are present in Romania. Our cultural cooperation also has a long history, and we note how enthusiastically yoga is celebrated every year in Romania. An Indian community of about 10,000, which includes students, are an important link between us. And obviously, it is our endeavor to grow this relationship further. I want to share with you that there's a particularly strong focus on its economic side. Now, it's also important to appreciate that Romania would benefit significantly from the expansion of India's cooperation with the European Union. Many of you would be aware that there was a landmark summit this May between our Prime Minister and the EU 27 leaders in Portugal. One of its important outcomes is the resumption of our FTA negotiations that have been stalled from 2015, from the time of the previous government. Not just that, there has been already some progress in that regard, and actually the formal talks start this month. We have also agreed to conclude early an investment agreement and one on geographical indicators. The India-EU connectivity partnership is also important for its bilateral implications, its quality connotations, and its third country possibilities. The strategic convergence between India and the EU is reflected in our positions on key regional and global issues, including, I must add, on Afghanistan and the Indo-Pacific. I'm sure that this will be duly noted by Romanian diplomats. Between our national and EU engagements, there is every reason to be optimistic about our continued cooperation. One reason why that is essential from the Romanian perspective is the likelihood that India will play a more visible role in global politics in the days to come. India's economic weight has already grown substantially, as indeed has its political influence. We are today members of the G20. Currently, we are a non-permanent member of the Security Council, of the EAS, of BRICS, of SCO, Quad, SAARC, BIMSTEC, IORA. So there's a long list out there. In our own vicinity, the Neighborhood First policy pursued since 2014 has strengthened connectivity, contacts, and commerce. India's growth is a tide lifting the larger region in the quest for prosperity. Towards Southeast Asia and beyond, the Act East policy has added security, connectivity, and greater societal contacts to a robust economic partnership. Now, this has now further developed into what has become known as an Indo-Pacific vision that contemplates opportunities much more seamlessly. To the West, a Link West outlook has actually transformed our ties with the Gulf states and fashioned a strategic construct that goes beyond energy, trade, and the diaspora. To the south, the Sagar Maritime Initiative has taken an integrated view of cooperation with various island and littoral states. With Africa, an ambitious development partnership and a larger footprint. In fact, all our new embassies we have opened in Africa has given a traditional relationship a new scale. India's engagement today extends through established mechanisms from the Pacific Islands on our east to the Caribbean on our west. Now, these developments may pertain to specific regions and theaters, but together they connote something much larger for the international order. The re-emergence of a civilizational state like India drives the rebalancing of world affairs in a significant manner. Obviously, that phenomenon has other aspects such as the rise of China, the growth of ASEAN, etc. But this rebalancing is today sufficiently advanced to create a more multipolar global architecture. In such a world, the challenge that diplomacy faces is to navigate the different poles and arrive at an optimal positioning. By its very nature, that is a dynamic and actually a perpetual exercise. The takeaway for those in our profession is that the emerging order really calls for a new type of foreign policy. The other undeniable reality of our times is, of course, the growth of globalization. Spanning virtually all the domains of human activity, it has led to interpenetration and interdependence of a kind that could not have been imagined earlier. Equally important, this has been actually a constraining factor on competition and has encouraged new forms of power and influence. At one level, it has strengthened the indivisibility of certain challenges like climate change, terrorism, and pandemics. But on the other hand, it has stirred a debate on the optimal nature of globalization. The COVID-19 pandemic has clearly made all nations of the world much more aware of external risks and vulnerabilities. It has raised questions about the centralized aspects of globalization, the debate I spoke about, and highlighted the importance of trust and transparency. Many states have defined their national security and strategic autonomy in a more expansive manner as a result. An issue that has emerged strongly on the global agenda is the requirement for resilient and reliable supply chains. Some of this is an objective demand, some arise from the behavior of states. But together, there is a wider appreciation today of the importance of global cooperation, particularly among states who share values and respect rules. So let me say that India and Romania, we have a significant convergence in our outlook of the world and of its contemporary challenges. Our cooperation has a larger beneficial impact as well. I'm very appreciative of the opportunity today to share some of our thinking with you, and I'll be delighted to take this conversation forward in the time which is left. Thank you.
Minister Jaishankar, for your insightful contribution to the works of our meeting. This ends the public part of this session, and we will continue shortly with the debate.